If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
I'm not a doctor, but I heard a giant glass of bourbon will help me get through talking about the Pittsburgh Pirates as we start spring training. Scott and I were so hopeful. Hope springs eternal, and then the poo-poo parade comes along and, puts a little bit of a damper on this. But as always, we're going to talk Pirates baseball anyway. Scott, how you doing, brother?
You're not a doctor? You might be the only person on Pirates Twitter that isn't a doctor at this point. Experts in wrist surgeries, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know somebody who's had a wrist surgery. Maybe I think my mom did. She had carpal tunnel, so maybe I'm an expert on carpal tunnel, but not the extender that goes past the thumb and different stuff like that. But yeah, everybody knows what the timetable is. They looked it up probably on WebMD. I mean, I'm guessing, Spencer Horwitz probably has cancer at this point because I'm pretty sure that's the joke about WebMD is you look it up and every single thing is a symptom of some type of cancer. But they were saying, well, this is like 12 weeks for this type of even a sports person, like to return to activities. And it's like, man, I'm just going to wait to see this play out. Obviously, it's not a great thing for this to happen, but if it is going to happen, I mean, he had his surgery about a week ago. They're talking about 6 to 8 weeks as the general timeline. We're already a week into that. So my thing is if this is going to happen for a guy who has, what is seen as chronic wrist injuries, that whatever this type of surgery, even though Charrington said this was like a secondary or a new type of thing, as we all know from the song we heard as a kid, the knee bone's connected to the whatever bone. Well, the hands and the wrist, they all kind of play together, and especially as a baseball player. So as we were talking about beforehand, maybe this is something that, I'm not a doctor, but maybe this is something that if you have the surgery, it kind of clears up whatever was ailing him previously.
Yeah, and if it needs to be taken care of, I'm happy that they take care of it right away because he's got 6 years of control, according to Ethan. And so that we can get it taken care of and not have this be a problem going forward in these years of control and miss a few weeks maybe of the regular season, then I'm all for it. I do have concerns about how that can affect potential power when you're talking about the wrist or the thumb or the hands, any of those, that area. And of course, GM speak does not soothe any feelings of any fans when he's saying things like, we believe that he can help contribute in 2025. He has a good chance to contribute in 2025. It's a long season, and that just makes Pirates fans think the worst. The worst. I'm going to defer to the experts. We know that these guys don't just sit on their couches until, oh, I got to get the plane ride to Florida. And then, okay, I guess I'll pack my bags. They're working out. They had the same doctor that looked at him in Toronto and looked at his wrist and did the medicals for him there, look at him for this injury and say, this is definitely something that has occurred. It's new. So this isn't, Toronto pulling something off with the Guardians and then to Pittsburgh. Apparently, it's legitimately a new injury. I have to defer to the people who are the experts, who know, who have access to that information. It's bad timing, but it happened. We just need to deal with it, and hopefully by taking care of it now, we don't build into a more chronic injury that requires multiple IL stints throughout the course of not just this season, but seasons to come.
Yeah, and that's like one of the first things I looked at, after hearing this news. I didn't hop on WebMD. I hopped on Spencer Horwitz's MLB page and went back through, his transaction page and what had happened with him. And yes, this may have been something that he has experienced. If you experience it either for a long period of time or you experience it on, multiple occasions, that's something that's seen as chronic. Well, I only saw one IL stint for 7 days for an undisclosed injury in the time that he was in the minors. So for me, like, I know that people hear that word chronic. Well, I'm pretty sure that there are guys that are dealing with chronic types of pain and chronic injuries in Major League Baseball that we may not even know about. So until it comes to the point where you're having surgery or you're sitting out for multiple weeks and months at a time, aka Cabrian Hayes, then we don't know that that is the actual chronic injury that is keeping you down. I always think of Luis Robert. Everybody was saying trade for him. Well, he has chronic soft tissue hamstring injuries that he suffers. It's chronic. He's been out at different times. So that's the other things that I look for. And I went straight to there, and then I went straight to Jason Martinez's roster resource page because I knew we had picked up some minor league players. I knew we had signed some of them. And I was kind of looking to see, okay, which one is left-handed. And then Ben Cherington, when he came out to, speak to the media, confirmed that one of the first names that he had said was Derek Hall. And that was, a left-handed guy who has played first base. The majority of his minor league career has played some in the majors. And that's a name that I landed on. And that's the first name that came up. Everybody's coming up with, kind of ways to fix this. If this is going to be a short-term injury, it's probably Derek Hall or DJ Stewart. I mean, that's just the realization. And if that is for a couple weeks, a month, that is something I can, maybe live with. If it would be longer than that, then, this season might be in trouble.
Yeah, and I guess Matt Gorski's been getting some time at first base, at least, it's the first couple days of spring training. And spring training hasn't even officially it's still pitchers and catchers at this point. I do hope that it is a very short-term solution that's needed and that a few weeks into the season, we won't care about it. We won't remember it. By the time the All-Star break comes, we'll forget that he missed the first couple weeks. Some of those guys, like you said, could just be Derek Hall, DJ Stewart could just be used as a stopgap and then dumped when he's ready to come back.
I think back to when AJ Burnett came over here and during his first spring training was doing a bunting drill, I believe it was, and got hit in the face with a ball, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, this season's over." Yeah. It obviously, it wasn't part of his arm. Something that was, for Horwitz, it's something he's going to have to use, every single day. But it automatically, kind of made me think of that. But I did mention, Brian's back, and that was there's something that is going to be a concern. We have Brian signed to, a long-term deal. It's obviously not a ton of money in Pirates terms, and the way Pirates fans look at it, it is a decent chunk of change because, for the most part in time, when we bring in a guy like a Tommy Pham and we're going to pay him $4 million, he's at least going to get a decent amount of playing time. If you're paying a Cabrian Hayes the $8 million, it's not a ton of money, but he is looked at as being that starter. And when he does play, and I'm not even talking about like with the bat at the end of the 2020 season or the bat, at the end of 2023, it's when he is just a slightly below league average hitter, his glove is so elite that it makes him a player that can win games for you. He's a guy that will keep you in games with certain plays. So that's to me where it's like, okay, Yeah, I do like to see it, and we talked about it before this. Is that I do like to see the change in the swing. I do like to see him trying to minimize the torque.
Hmm.
He
Yeah.
talked about building up his core, and that's something that's going to help him with that with his back. But he did say, that he is in pain, not a lot of pain. It's like, are you? It's something that he's always going to have to deal with, and how can you minimize that? And hopefully, this is the season where Brian Hayes is healthy for, I mean, most of the season, if not the entire season, because he did in 2023 have to take a month off before he hit that string, and can just be the defensive stalwart at third base, and can provide you a little bit of offense in that pop. Because I don't know, like we keep on saying, what if Brian Hayes can hit 15 to 20 home runs? Well, to me, it's just like, okay, let's just keep Brian Hayes healthy, and whatever we get from him offensively, it's almost like from the catcher position that it's a bonus.
Yeah. Yeah. If he can be, he doesn't have to be what he was at the end of 2023, which would be, I think, if he maintained that through the course of most of the season, including his defense, you're talking MVP candidate just for what he, eye test brings to the team. He's not going to be a 40 home run guy, but he can give you some pop. He can hit some doubles. He can drive in some runs. He can save you some runs on the field. And if it does mean that he's going to miss a month of the season, that's where Jared Triolo and his glove and his bit of emergence with his bat becomes that much bigger of a piece. But then, same thing we've been talking about for months. IKF is at the end of his contract. This is his last year. The thought might be to move Triolo into shortstop if IKF gets moved at the trade deadline. But you need to have Triolo as that insurance policy for Key Brian Hayes and his back. And hey, it's awesome that he's doing what he has to do to try to build his core strength, work on the two-handed swing versus the one-handed swing. I see him, and I look at when he reports for spring training. Man, that guy hits the weight room and he hits it hard. And I just don't know how that, maybe that's an old school philosophy. I just don't know how hitting the weights that hard necessarily translates into baseball and the flexibility that's needed and be a little bit limber. And hey, if it helps with his back, then I'm all for it. I just don't want him to get rigid and stiff with that swing.
No, absolutely not. And he definitely, yeah, every single time he comes into spring training, you could tell like his arms are a little bit bigger, and he's done that before. And looking healthy. Well, it's one thing to look healthy, and it's another thing to be healthy, and that's where it just is so important. I mean, I know that during those runs in 2013 through 2015, we did have some swings and misses as far as the extensions. I mean, Jose Tabata did have a good season, but for the most part would be kind of seen as a swing and miss.
Mhm.
Gregory Polanco, kind of seen as a swing and miss. Obviously, you have
The injury, really.
Kutch, the injury absolutely on his shoulder, that slide. I felt like coming into his own that season, and that just derailed his entire career. I'm pretty sure we could do an entire podcast on that because El Cafe was that guy that when he was supposed to come up, he was going to be that impact. But yeah, I mean, you did have some of that stuff. You did have the Kutch contract, which was like a big hit, but then you also had these little contracts to like you mentioned, like a Mercer, a Josh Harrison, these types of things that were, some pretty big successes for the team.
Marte.
Yeah, Marte, that's another one. So I mean, you're gonna have those, but it makes it exponentially harder when it's somebody that you're relying on to play such like I would say just like a crucial position.
But you're
Um,
right also, for the money that he's making, there are teams that would gladly pay him that money just for his defense and take
oh
his
yeah,
back completely out of the equation.
yeah, absolutely, and that's where like, It's gonna be, it's gonna have to be another wait and see. We're waiting and seeing with, Horwitz. We're waiting and seeing with his back. I mean, luckily we're only on the second day of spring training, but I feel like as Pirates fans, we wanted this offseason to end like so quickly, just because, the moves may have not been made that we wanted to see made. They may have not done enough. And eventually we were even just saying, let's just kind of see what happens on the field. And so, like, with like, even if there's just general baseball activities and they haven't even played a spring training game, it was like they wanted to see them just like hit the ground running. And for right now, those are like two of the things where it's just like you do have a guy who has a chronic back injury. I mean, David Bednar has a chronic back injury. He's a guy that's been out with the back at different times and not. But I mean, that's neither here nor there. It's just that we kind of wanted to see, all this different type of stuff. But we did see a couple guys. I mean, one guy I definitely did not expect to see, and it was one of the first things we mentioned to each other was seeing Dowry Money Moreta like actually throwing from the mound less than a year removed from Tommy John surgery. I mean, that guy, we knew he was a character. We knew, I mean, pulling out the money at the end of the season in 2023, and that he did have some good stuff that he was using. But I mean, to work yourself back to that and to be on the mound, in less than a year removed, like I'm honestly still not counting on him to be a part of like the opening day lineup, the
Oh,
bullpen. But it is good to see him out there and just throwing a baseball from the mound, less than a year removed from, us seeing him in spring training and seeing him walk off the mound holding his elbow thinking, oh God, what happened to a guy we were pretty much counting on in some ways in that bullpen.
yeah, and him coming back when he does come back helps the pieces fall together the way they should. And there's a lot of what ifs there, like we talk about with Bednar. Can Bednar be the Bednar that we hope that he can be? Can Majinski become that eighth inning guy? I really, at this point, Holderman has not shown anything to me that he is ready for anything beyond the seventh inning. And then that allows, Money Moreta to be that fireman that comes in when you got runners on and you need a stopper to limit the damage. That's where he really, I thought, excelled in the season that he had with the Pirates. And just speaking of guys pitching off the mound, yeah, it was nice to see Oviedo pitching to Endy. That was a great video with Endy wearing the sunglasses that had the camera, seeing them throw some pitches, and Moretta only throwing a couple. But it's good to see those guys hook up. But man, Paul Skeens and Bubba Chandler, side by side pitching and those spring training videos injected straight into my veins, man. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, I was so excited about that type of stuff. I saw another one that was like Harrington and Barco, and I mean
Hmm.
just the arms that the Pirates have. I mean, Oviedo is a big topic of discussion and has been like this entire offseason. I know we've talked about him, Scott, where I was, kind of thinking, I don't know what he's going to come back. Like I expected to see him on the mound. I actually expected to see him yesterday because I figure that's who a lot of, the Pirates beat reporters and whoever that's
Hmm.
down there is kind of looking to see because I mean, even Shelton had said he had seen, some videos of him, but nobody had, really seen him live since he stepped off the mound at the end of 2023. So this was like a big thing. Uh, Took some questions, about him. The Pirates brass did today about, where they see him fitting in. And with Shelton, I go back to an interview he did, I believe it was in probably about December, is, people asking him what's the plan for Oviedo. And he echoed it to me again today. And that's why I've been kind of taking the stance that I've been taking, that I just, that they have him plugged into that fifth rotation spot, and a lot of people do. And I mean, I know he's on there. Once again, I'll mention Jason Martinez on roster resources. That's what everybody will always show is, he's kind of in there. But for anybody who's listened to this show for, a long time, I've had Jason on here previously, and he's talked through his process of how he makes those types of lineups. Well, if he doesn't put Oviedo in there, who was, the number 2 starter for the Pirates, I mean, even though there was probably only like maybe 2 starters towards the end of that season, and he doesn't put him into there, I mean, he's not going to make the proclamation. I mean, he's got a reputation. He's not going to say Bubba Chandler. He's not going to say, Thomas Harrington. He's not going to put Mike Burrows in there, Braxton Ashcraft. So for him, it's like, who is kind of the most safe person to put in there, and that is Oviedo. But with Shelton, he talked in December about easing him in. Talked about easing him in again today, saying that this is kind of like the first step. Mentioned again for the second time in about limiting innings. I mean, I've heard on other podcasts, I've heard other different places that people are getting stuff where it's like, I'll put Oviedo in the starting rotation at the beginning of the season, and he can go like 6 or 7 innings, and then when he starts to wear down, then we can move him into the bullpen role. The man hasn't pitched as a starter since September, October of 2023. I mean,
yeah.
I know that he has had what is seen as like a more regular offseason, but I mean, honestly, he had his surgery in I think it was November of 2023. So then you're looking at November of 2024. This still is not a normal offseason for him. And yes, it is great to see him on the mound, but I mean, man, I'm just still thinking, I picture at his peak for this season, I picture like a Luis Ortiz role, but
exactly,
and maybe not as many innings, because Luis ended up going up to like, what was it, 120, 130 last year, and I don't know if Oviedo's hitting that, because Shelton will say there's going to be a line. They have that in their minds. So no matter what people think, if his body can handle it, if it's not, those will be the same people that if they pitch him 120 to 140 innings and he comes down with another injury, that they'll be jumping down their throats.
Yeah, I do think that what people are saying, that they should reverse that. And I mean, Ortiz started off, spot starts or maybe the long relief. I think you shorten that up a little bit if you want him to be on the major league roster there. If you don't want to just send him to Indy to help have him kind of stretch his arm out there, you start him, maybe 2 innings, an inning here, inning there, save it. And then by the end of the year, when you're ready to work him back more towards the rotation, you're going to want to take that initial step with some of these guys that are coming up from the minors, and maybe they can piggyback him. You can save some innings with Oviedo, have him start a game, go 3-4 innings, and then you have a Harrington or an Ashcraft that can come up piggyback behind that. So you're not maxing both guys out with their innings, and hopefully you're in a playoff push and you're getting the best out of both of those guys deep into the season, and not just blowing Oviedo's arm up at the beginning of the season to get to a hot start. Maybe Caleb Ferguson does start in the rotation, and then by the end of the year, you flip them, and he gets into his more traditional bullpen role. Hopefully it doesn't just flame out for him, but hopefully he has success in the rotation. Then you flip him into the bullpen, and you flip Oviedo to the rotation. And because I think obviously Oviedo is long term going to be in the rotation, and so he needs to finish the year, or at least to finish his year in the rotation, whether that means they shut him down early or not. But he finishes his time in the major leagues this year in the rotation, and then we'll see where they stand at that point.
Because I look back to JT Brubaker, obviously traded away, but he was a guy that I watched throughout the minors, watched him come back from an injury. And he talked about how important it was for pitchers to finish the season. It wasn't like the starting of the season was, something that they were all geared up to do. They're all competitors. But for pitchers to finish the season and finish the year on the mound and not finish it, quote unquote, being shut down, because that messes, if you want to get him back into that normal offseason and, stretch him out to be in the starting rotation next year, or even the Luis Ortiz role where you're going to be 3-4 innings and then stretched out to a regular starter, whatever it may be. It was just so important for them to kind of finish that season. And I was telling you before we jumped on here that, I mean, I'm the type of guy that, like, I'm not a doctor. I go like looking for this stuff in like national medicine journals and like studies of like recovery times for different things. And the one thing that stuck out to me was there was an article that says that there is, not a ton of evidence of, if you don't limit the innings on pitchers after surgery and different types of stuff, there's not a ton of, evidence that that could hinder their career. But the other piece of that is that Major League Baseball teams have just kind of started to do that, like no matter what. And if Shelton's saying it, I mean, I'm kind of trusting Shelton. Like that's one thing I know that it's been written about, Charrington and Shelton over the past couple of days, especially concerning like the Horwitz injury, is I don't think any of them are liars. I don't think they're like making stuff up and doing different things. So when he's saying it, I definitely think it's going to be true. But the other piece of this is that there was an attached study that basically said that of the pitchers in, the majors and the minors who underwent Tommy John surgery, in their first quote unquote full season back from Tommy John surgery, there was only 83% of them that actually pitched. The rest of them did not pitch, during that next year, either due to a setback, whatever it may be. Some of the guys may not have ever even come back. Of that 83%, the average amount of innings they pitched was 22% of the innings that they had pitched during their previous full season. For Oviedo, that would be 177. I'm not great at math, so I put it into my calculator, and that was around 39 innings. That basically means that, I mean, that's kind of the average. But, obviously there's guys that pitch more. There's guys that are probably going to pitch, like they might pitch 1, 2, 3 innings and then not come back. So, I mean, you take the average of that. For me, like for some reason in my head, I keep on having like 80 to 100 innings. It just like sticks in my head. 120 if you're really pushing it, and that would be, in my mind, completely pushing it. Obviously, I'm not a doctor. They're going to evaluate this throughout the season. But that's just something that don't want to see happen as a guy rehab, work his way back the whole way back from Tommy John, somebody who you traded for and then built him back up to be a starter who became a pretty good starter that, I hate to give them numbers, but at this point in time would probably be a 4 or 5 in this rotation if everybody's, running based on his past performance. But a 4 or 5 who can give you 170, 180 plus innings in today's baseball, hopefully pushes ERA closer down to 4, maybe under 4. I mean, that's something that just doesn't grow on trees.
Right. And yeah, you need to manage that appropriately and not push your luck on that. And you're right. Yeah, we're talking about the Brubaker thing with the psychology of it, and that's along the same thing that I've been saying with the team. They had the same record 2 years in a row. It's all about how you finish the season. One year they finish on the upswing, and everybody's excited, can't wait for the next season. Last year they're cold when they finish the season. They just kind of limp into the off season. You have a completely different expectation. We're all kind of down in the dumps going into the season. We don't have the highest hopes like we did last year. And so if you translate that to a guy's career, and yeah, he's shooting for the moon because these guys are professional athletes. They have a lot of confidence. They've only ever succeeded in their lives athletically. And so, yeah, he's going to say all the right things in spring training, but that's where Charrington and Shelton step in and say we need to manage this properly, because not only are you going to be with us this year, we've got a few more years with you, and hopefully, hey, maybe if things work out, we extend them and we keep them for a long time. It's not just a single season. That's the thing with baseball. You have that single season that we're all focused on, but these guys, they have to think about the next year. They have to think about the year after. They have to play the long game too, and that's why baseball is such a balancing act, because the front office is doing that, And even in the season, you play 162 games to then go into a sprint in the playoffs if you do things well. And man, it's a tough balancing act every way you cut it.
Yeah, and for the people that, with Charrington, I know that there's people saying that this, if they don't succeed, that this is his last year. Well, we don't know that right now, and he doesn't know that right now. So even with him, it kind of seems like that with like the Horwitz stuff, like you said before, we have him for 6 years. Let's get this out of the way now. And for him, it's maybe not as big of a deal as it is for us because he's looking long term. He's looking longevity. Obviously, he wants to compete this year, but in his mind, he also sees Horwitz come back and hopefully contributing this year. And you can fill in until then. You do what you do with Oviedo, not to burn him out this year, and then next year he's dealing with the same type of stuff, or God forbid he would become injured again. This isn't for people that watch other sports. This isn't a running back on the last year of his rookie deal and you run his legs off because he's not coming back. I mean, in baseball, you're building a team not only for this season, but you're building a team for the next. I would think they probably have 2 to 3 seasons at least in their minds, kind of like laid out as to the way they would want to see things to go. Not saying they will go that way. Yeah. So for Oviedo, I'm just not seeing, maybe what other people are seeing. Maybe I'm going to end up and we'll end up being wrong. But I've just seen, not a million guys, but 100 guys come back from injuries. And there was only twice where guys came back from Tommy John that I can remember in recent memory. There might be another one. I think Robbie Ray did pretty well as well. But you had Adam Wainwright and Justin Verlander, and those two guys are probably going to be in the Hall of Fame. And those guys, were built different. And Oviedo maybe as well, but also the mentality of baseball was built different back then. And right now, it's if you're coming back from a Tommy John surgery, those innings are going to be limited, and we're going to ease you back in. We're not going to throw you to the fire.
And along those same lines about talking about thinking in the future, another piece of news that came out in these last couple of days is that Derek Shelton has said that Brian Reynolds is going to be moved to right field, which is something you've brought up several times. And the idea of maybe being a little easier on his body. He's got the arm that can profile for it, doing very well with outfield assists last year after a down year the year before. So, again, thinking about how you can, these guys, how you can put them in the best position to succeed, not just this season, but for their career as Brian Reynolds starts to also get a little bit older. And also, something that Charrington said that we should probably address is that Reynolds is not moving to first base, Andy Rodriguez not moving to first base. And so it seems like Reynolds will find his spot in right field, which was the plan last year before things fell apart with Sawinski and we had to shuffle the way things were done. But in a perfect situation for this team, Brian Reynolds is the right fielder.
Yeah, I think that we're 2 for 2 on this offseason of outfielders. We said they were going to pick up a right-handed bat, and they did. And we said Reynolds was going to move to right field. Now, I don't know if that's completely going to stick, and I don't know if Tommy Pham's going to be successful, in left field, obviously getting a little bit older. But, for Reynolds and for a guy that is going to be with you longer, I think this is just the correct move for him. Just because, that left field, as all of us say, Pirates fans all say, is that left field is another center field at PNC Park, and you play, half of your games there. And for Brian Reynolds, yeah, the right fielder needs to have a strong arm. He needs to know where to throw the ball. And Brian Reynolds, last year, I think it was 11 outfield assists. He did very well in his last year in center field with that as well. But as the legs start to slow down a little bit, and you want to preserve that health going into your 30s. And I think that's where maybe Reynolds' mind was thinking is I've been talking about them, about first base for the past, 3 seasons, I think he said at the end of the year, is just because, he's realizing, Father Time is undefeated and how can I, prolong my career? So for him, I mean, his contract's already guaranteed. So, he could kind of shut it off like, some players do, but that's not the type of player Brian Reynolds is. And he's trying to think, how can I prolong my career? How can I contribute to the team? And, I think at this point in time, that best place, is in right field. I wouldn't have minded seeing that first base experiment from time to time, but for him, I mean, if this ends up working out and the plan comes to fruition this year, like it was supposed to last year, because we've even talked about that, was they brought in Michael A. Taylor in the first game of spring training after they brought him in. Reynolds was in right, Swinsky was in left, and it was just like, oh yeah, we're going to try this and not be so stringent on that. I mean, I would like to see, for Brian Reynolds and for the Pirates for that to play out, just because I think it just fits him a little better. You don't have as much ground to cover. Your arm can still be effective because that is what, the Pirates and yourself worked on the previous season. So I want to see that continue to grow. But yeah, I mean, and I like hearing, that they're going to stick with Endy at catcher. Obviously, we've talked about this. I think he's going to start in the minors, and, unless there would be some, great catastrophe or something. I mean, we also saw that last spring training as well because, Yasmani Grandal didn't start there, and then Jason DeLay got hurt pretty soon, into the season and had to go on. I mean, but it got us Joey Bart. But for Endy, for a guy who's been rehabbing, I would, much rather keep him in his, I guess, most comfortable position he's most knowledgeable in. I'd rather keep him in that as he does that. But yeah, I mean, Brian Reynolds, right field, good. Endy Rodriguez, catcher, good. Spencer Horwitz, get healthy, so you can start playing first base. Until that time, we'll see Derek Hall.